I used to believe that hard work spoke for itself, that if you put in the hours, stayed humble, and did your best, people would notice. That merit mattered more than politics, that talent would rise to the top naturally, that the corporate world operated on some basic principle of fairness. I was naive, and that naivety nearly cost me my career. My name is Jordan, and I'm a software engineer at a mid-sized tech company called Vertex Solutions. Or, at least, I was just a software engineer. This is the story of how I went from being someone's stepping stone to someone they warn new managers about in leadership training. It all started 2 years ago when Alex Thompson joined our team as the new engineering manager. He came in with impressive credentials: Stanford MBA, previous stint at a Fortune 500, references that glowed like they'd been written by his publicist. He had the kind of polished confidence that makes executives nod in approval, the kind of smooth charisma that fills rooms and empties critical thinking. I should have seen the red flags from day one. Our first one-on-one meeting should have told me everything I needed to know. Alex leaned back in his ergonomic chair, fingers steepled like some kind of corporate villain from a movie, and asked me about my career aspirations. Not my current projects, not my technical skills, not what I was working on, my aspirations. I just want to do good work, I told him honestly. Build things that matter, solve interesting problems, maybe mentor some junior developers eventually. He smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. That's admirable, Jordan, really. But in this industry, you need to think bigger. Visibility matters. It's not enough to do good work. People need to know you're doing good work. At the time, I thought he was giving me career advice. Looking back, he was telling me exactly how he operated. He was giving me the playbook I was too stupid to recognize. Alex had a different philosophy than any manager I'd worked with before. Take credit, deflect blame, and climb fast. And I, with my head down and my focus on the code, was just a rung on his ladder. A particularly convenient rung, as it turned out. It started small, so small I almost convinced myself I was being oversensitive. There was the team meeting in his second week where I mentioned a solution to a persistent bug that had been plaguing our deployment pipeline. A nasty issue with race conditions that I'd spent 3 late nights tracking down and fixing. I explained my approach, showed the team the fix, got some appreciative nods from my colleagues. 2 days later, in a meeting with senior leadership that I wasn't invited to, Alex presented his solution to the deployment issue. I only found out because my teammate Marcus pulled me aside afterward. "Hey, weird question," Marcus had said, looking uncomfortable. "That deployment fix you did last week, did Alex help you with that?" "No, why?" "Because he just told the VP it was his idea, said he'd guided the team to the solution." I laughed it off. Told Marcus it was probably just a miscommunication, that Alex had probably said the team, and it got interpreted as him. I was generous in my interpretation because I wanted to believe the best in people, because I'd been raised to assume good intentions, because I was an idiot. Then there was the email incident. I'd sent a detailed project proposal to Alex for a new feature that would significantly improve our user authentication flow. Spent a weekend researching best practices, drawing up architecture diagrams, calculating resource requirements. It was solid work, the kind of proposal that could really move the needle for our product. Alex responded with a brief, "Thanks, I'll review and get back to you." A week later, I saw the same proposal, my diagrams, my research, my recommendations, forwarded to the director of engineering. But the email was from Alex, and it began with, "I've been thinking about our authentication challenges, and I have some ideas I'd like to propose." No mention of me. No, "Jordan put this together," or "based on Jordan's research," or even a casual, "my team came up with this." Just Alex, presenting my work as his own, with the casual confidence of someone who'd done it many times before. I forwarded him the original email I'd sent, Subject line, re-authentication proposal. His response came within minutes. Yes, thanks for the initial thoughts. I expanded on them significantly before sending to leadership. Good teamwork. Expanded on them significantly. The man had changed the font and added his name and called it Significant Expansion. But I didn't confront him, not then. I told myself I was being political, strategic, professional. Really, I was just afraid. Afraid of being labeled difficult or not a team player, afraid of rocking the boat, afraid that speaking up would cost me more than staying silent. So I stayed silent, and Alex took that silence as permission. The pattern escalated, a missed mention in a meeting here, an oversight in an email there. My contributions slowly erased from the record, rewritten in real time as Alex's achievements. It was gaslighting in corporate form, subtle enough that calling it out would make me seem paranoid, consistent enough that it was clearly intentional. I started noticing other things too. The way Alex positioned himself in meetings, always standing near the whiteboard, always ready to summarize other people's ideas as if they were his own. The way he'd interrupt presentations to add context that somehow shifted the credit toward himself. The way he'd volunteer to present our findings to leadership, then conveniently forget to mention who'd actually done the finding. He had a gift for making himself indispensable while making everyone else invisible. My teammate Sarah was the first to vocally notice. She'd been with the company for 5 years, had seen managers come and go, had developed a finely tuned bullshit detector. "He's doing it to all of us," she said one day at lunch, her voice low despite the noise of the crowded cafeteria. That whole presentation last week about improving our sprint velocity, that was my analysis, my recommendations. I spent 2 weeks on that data. "He credited the team, though," I said, weakly. "He credited himself for leading the team to these insights," Sarah corrected. Which is code for I'm taking credit without technically lying. It's smart, actually. Frustratingly smart. She was right. Alex never outright lied. He just shaped the truth until it reflected only his image. He was a credit thief, operating in the gray area between facts and implications. And he was very, very good at it. But the worst was yet to come. 6 months into Alex's tenure, I started on what would become my magnum opus. At least, it was supposed to be mine. A comprehensive automation project that would streamline our entire testing and deployment pipeline. It was ambitious, complex, and exactly the kind of high-visibility work that could define a career. I'd pitched the idea to Alex in one of our one-on-ones, showed him my preliminary research, my proof of concept, my timeline for implementation. "This is great, Jordan," he'd said, with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm, really innovative thinking. "Let's do it. You'll need to keep me updated on your progress, of course. Weekly check-ins so I can provide guidance and remove any blockers. I should have known better. I should have recognized the setup, but I was excited about the project, proud of the idea, eager to build something meaningful. So I agreed to the weekly check-ins. I documented everything, shared my progress, walked him through every decision and challenge. I thought I was being collaborative, communicating effectively with my manager. I was handing him the rope he'd eventually use to hang me with. For 6 months, I worked on that automation project. Late nights, weekends, the occasional 2 a.m. debugging session fueled by cold coffee and stubborn determination. It was the most technically challenging work I'd ever done, integrating with multiple systems, writing custom tools, building a framework that would save the company thousands of hours of manual testing. I was proud of it, so proud. Every time a piece fell into place, every time a complex problem yielded to elegant code, I felt that deep satisfaction that comes from building something real, something valuable. Alex attended my weekly updates religiously, asked questions, offered vague encouragement, occasionally suggested I document this more thoroughly so the team can learn from it. I thought he was being supportive. I thought he cared about the project's success. He did care about the project's success. He just cared about it for very different reasons than I did. As the project neared completion, Alex started having more frequent conversations with senior leadership, started getting invited to high-level strategy meetings, started being referred to as one of our rising stars in company newsletters. I didn't connect the dots. I was too focused on finishing the automation project, too buried in the technical details to notice the political maneuvering happening above my head. My first real warning came from Marcus again. He'd been pulled into a project planning meeting with the director of engineering, a meeting I hadn't been invited to, despite the fact that we were supposedly planning the rollout of my automation system. "Jordan," Marcus said, finding me at my desk after the meeting, "I think you need to talk to HR." "Why? What happened?" "Alex just presented your entire automation project as his own, stood there with your architecture diagrams and your code examples and talked about his vision for the system and his technical leadership in building it." The director was eating it up, talking about how Alex is exactly the kind of innovative manager they need. The floor dropped out from under me. He didn't mention me at all. He mentioned the team in passing, said something about how good leadership is, about empowering your people to execute your vision, which I guess technically includes you, but he's taking credit for my work. Yeah, completely. I felt sick. 6 months of work, my best idea, my most challenging technical achievement, and Alex was presenting it to leadership as his own. Soon, he was presenting my projects as his own, subtly rewriting history with each PowerPoint slide, each casual conversation with executives, each performance review where his accomplishments grew while mine shrank. I went home that night in a daze, sat on my couch staring at nothing, trying to process what was happening. I'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much, poured everything I had into that project, and Alex was going to get promoted because of it. The moment that broke me wasn't even loud. That's what I remember most clearly. The absence of drama, the mundane setting, the casual way my work was stolen in front of everyone I respected. It was a Tuesday morning, one of those bright spring days where the light comes in too cheerfully through office windows, mocking whatever internal darkness you're carrying. We had our monthly all-hands review session, scheduled for 9 a.m. The entire engineering department gathered in the large conference room, about 30 people total, including our director of engineering, our CTO, and several senior architects whose opinions carried significant weight. These meetings were usually boring affairs. Status updates, quarterly goal reviews, the occasional announcement about benefits or company policy. I'd brought my coffee and my laptop, planning to half listen while catching up on some documentation. The agenda listed Alex as presenting an update on recent technical innovations and efficiency improvements. I assumed it would be a team update, maybe some metrics about our sprint velocity or deployment frequency. Probably boring, probably fine. I was so spectacularly wrong. Alex stood at the front of the room with a presentation loaded up, looking confident and polished in his expensive button-down and his TED Talk posture. He thanked everyone for coming, made a self-deprecating joke that landed well, then launched into his presentation. Over the past 6 months, he began, clicking to a slide that made my blood run cold. I've been working on a comprehensive solution to our testing and deployment bottlenecks. My slide, my architecture diagram, my color coding system for different components. The challenge was clear, Alex continued smoothly. Our manual testing processes were eating up valuable engineering time. Our deployment pipeline was fragile and slow, and we needed a way to scale our operations without scaling our headcount proportionally. He clicked to the next slide. My proof of concept results, my performance benchmarks, my projected time savings. So I started exploring automation frameworks that could integrate with our existing systems. The key insight was realizing that we needed a custom solution, something built specifically for our architecture, rather than trying to force our workflows into off-the-shelf tools. My insight, my reasoning, my technical decisions, explained with the casual authority of someone who'd thought them up himself. I sat there, frozen, as Alex walked through 6 months of my work. He showed my code examples, explained my architectural choices, demonstrated my automated testing framework. Every slide was something I'd created. Every technical decision was one I'd made. Every elegant solution to complex problems came from my late nights and weekend sessions, and he presented it all as his own masterpiece. The impact has been substantial, Alex said, showing a slide with metrics I'd compiled just last week. We've reduced testing time by 70%. Deployment frequency has increased by 200%, and we've eliminated approximately 90% of production bugs that previously slipped through manual testing. Our director, Linda, was nodding appreciatively. The CTO was taking notes. The senior architects were leaning forward, engaged and impressed. This represents the kind of technical leadership and innovative thinking that Vertex needs, Linda said when Alex paused. How long did this take you to develop? About 6 months of dedicated work, Alex replied smoothly. Of course, I had help from the team implementing various pieces, but the overall vision and architecture were mine. Help from the team. That's what I'd been reduced to. Help. Implementation. The hands that executed someone else's vision. The applause started then. Genuine, appreciative applause for work they thought Alex had done. I saw people turning to whisper to each other, impressed. I saw Linda making eye contact with the CTO with that look that said, "This is the kind of person we need to promote." The applause stung more than the betrayal. I should have stood up, should have said something, corrected the record, defended my work. But I sat there, silent, my coffee going cold in my hands, as everyone congratulated Alex on his brilliance. Sarah caught my eye from across the room. She looked horrified, furious on my behalf. She mouthed, "Say something," but I just shook my head. What could I say? Actually, that was my project. In front of the entire department, contradicting my manager, making a scene, I'd look petty. Jealous, like someone who couldn't handle their manager getting credit for team accomplishments. Alex had positioned the theft so perfectly that defending myself would make me look worse than staying silent. So I stayed silent, and that silence burned like acid in my throat. After the meeting ended and people filtered out, still buzzing about Alex's impressive presentation, Marcus and Sarah cornered me in the hallway. "You have to report this," Sarah said urgently. "That was blatant, Jordan. Everyone in that room thinks Alex built your entire system." "HR needs to know," Marcus agreed. "This isn't just taking credit for a small thing. This is career-making work, and he just stole it in front of the entire leadership team." "And say what?" I asked bitterly. "That my manager is taking credit for my work? He'll say he was presenting team accomplishments. That as the manager, he's supposed to represent the team's work to leadership. That I'm being overly sensitive about attribution. But he's smart about it," I interrupted. "He never says, 'I wrote this code,' or 'I built this system.' He just says, 'I've been working on this,' and 'my vision,' and lets everyone else fill in the blanks. And those blanks get filled in with assumptions that benefit him." Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but she knew I was right. Alex had engineered the perfect crime, technically defensible, practically devastating. "So what are you going to do?" she asked quietly. I looked at her, at Marcus, at these colleagues who'd become friends, who'd seen Alex's pattern of behavior, who knew the truth, even if leadership didn't. "I don't know yet," I said. But that was a lie. In that moment, standing in the hallway outside the conference room where my career had just been stolen, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to destroy him, not with drama or confrontation or emotional outbursts, Not by making a scene or going to HR with vague complaints about credit allocation. Not by playing by the rules of a system that was clearly designed to protect people like Alex. No, I was going to be smarter than that. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. Not in any way he'd see coming. I knew better now. I knew what kind of man he was. A man who climbed by stepping on others, who built his reputation on stolen work, who smiled while stabbing you in the back and called it leadership. And I knew exactly how to make him fall. I just needed to be patient, methodical, strategic. All the things I'd been while building the automation system, except this time, I'd be building something very different. I'd be building a trap. That evening, I went home and did something I should have done months ago. I opened up a fresh document and started writing down everything. Every project Alex had taken credit for, every email where he'd erased my contributions, every meeting where he'd rewritten history, dates, times, witnesses, documentation. I went through my email archives, my chat logs, my version control commits. I pulled up old calendar invites and project plans. I documented the timeline of my automation project in excruciating detail. Every weekly update I'd sent to Alex, every technical decision I'd documented, every piece of code I'd written with timestamps proving authorship. The evidence was overwhelming. 6 months of weekly updates where I'd explain my progress, my decisions, my implementations. Hundreds of Git commits with my name on them. Architecture documents I'd written, design decisions I'd made, problems I'd solved. All of it time-stamped. All of it documented. All of it provably mine. Alex had made one crucial mistake in his theft. He'd been so confident in his ability to take credit that he'd never bothered to cover the digital trail. He'd assumed that perception mattered more than evidence, that his word as a manager would always trump mine as an individual contributor. He'd assumed I'd stay silent. I spent that entire evening documenting everything, organizing it into a clear timeline, preparing a case that was airtight and undeniable. By midnight, I had a 30-page document with embedded screenshots, email threads, and code samples that told an unambiguous story. Alex had systematically stolen credit for my work, and I could prove it. But I didn't send it to HR. Not yet. Because I realized something important. Catching Alex stealing credit for past work would get him a slap on the wrist at most. A stern talking to, maybe a note in his file, perhaps some mandatory training on proper attribution of team contributions. He'd suffer some embarrassment, but he'd survive. He'd spin it as a misunderstanding, a communication issue, a difference in perspective about how managers should present team achievements. And then he'd find ways to make my life miserable while staying just within the bounds of professional behavior. No, I needed something bigger, something undeniable, something that would end his career at Vertex, not just slow it down. I needed to catch him in the act again, but this time with the trap already set. So I made a plan, a patient, methodical, absolutely devastating plan. I started documenting everything with the thoroughness of someone building a legal case. Because that's essentially what I was doing, except the trial would be held in HR's office instead of a courtroom, and the sentence would be career death instead of prison time. Every file I created got a detailed metadata trail. Every piece of code I wrote included embedded comments with timestamps and attribution. Every email I sent was carefully worded to establish clear ownership while maintaining a professional, collaborative tone. But here's the thing. I did all of this invisibly. I didn't change my outward behavior at all. I still attended Alex's one-on-ones, still sent him weekly updates, still played the role of the dedicated employee who just wanted to do good work. The only difference was that now every interaction was documented, every contribution was time-stamped. Every piece of evidence was cataloged in a growing file that would eventually bury him. I stopped sharing code on shared drives where Alex could access my work in progress. Instead, I worked in a private repository and only pushed to the team repository when features were complete. This served two purposes. It prevented Alex from getting early access to my work, and it created a clear commit history showing exactly who wrote what and when. I quietly looped HR into weekly progress updates, copying myself in on every email, not obviously. I didn't send emails directly to HR about my concerns. That would have tipped my hand. Instead, I started sending weekly status reports to the team mailing list that included AHR's general inbox as a CC, just routine project updates, completely normal and professional. Except these updates were carefully worded to establish ownership. This week, I completed the implementation of the dynamic test generation module, building on the architecture I designed in March. Following up on the caching optimization strategy I proposed in my April 23rd email, I've now deployed the first version. Attached are the performance benchmarks I ran for the new deployment pipeline, showing the 70% improvement over baseline. Every sentence was factual, professional, and undeniably specific about authorship. Every update went into HR's inbox, creating a contemporaneous record of my work that Alex couldn't retroactively modify. Sarah and Marcus became my unofficial witnesses, not because I asked them to, I didn't want to put them in an awkward position, but because they'd seen Alex's pattern and started documenting it themselves. Sarah began taking notes in meetings about who actually proposed what ideas. Marcus started screenshot messages where Alex took credit for others' work. We didn't coordinate this. We didn't have secret meetings to plot against Alex. We just independently reached the same conclusion. Someone needed to create a record of the truth before Alex's version of events became the only version anyone remembered. The trap was being set piece by piece, and Alex, confident in his stolen success and his political acumen, walked right into it. When the next big project came down from leadership, I saw my opportunity. The company had decided to overhaul our customer-facing API, a massive undertaking that would touch nearly every part of our system. It was high-visibility work that could make or break someone's career. The kind of project that gets mentioned in promotion discussions and determines who's considered senior leadership material. In our team meeting when the project was announced, Alex's eyes lit up with that particular gleam I'd come to recognize, the look of someone seeing an opportunity to claim another accomplishment. "This is a significant technical challenge," Alex said, already positioning himself. "We'll need strong leadership to coordinate across teams and ensure we're making the right architectural decisions." I waited a beat, then spoke up. "I'd be interested in taking the lead on this. I've been thinking about our API structure for a while, and I have some ideas about how to approach the redesign." Alex smiled that smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That's great enthusiasm, Jordan. How about this? You take the technical lead, and I'll handle the stakeholder management and the strategic direction. That way, you can focus on the implementation while I make sure we're aligned with business objectives. Translation: you do the work, I'll take the credit." "That sounds perfect," I said, matching his fake smile with my own. Sarah shot me a look across the conference table. She knew what I was doing, and she looked worried. But I gave a small shake of my head. "Trust me," the gesture said. "I know what I'm doing." And I did. I spent the next month working on the API redesign proposal, but this time I was playing dumb. Not in an obvious way. I still produced good work, still demonstrated technical competence. But I was strategic about what I showed Alex and what I kept to myself. I gave him the broad strokes in our weekly one-on-ones, showed him high-level architecture diagrams that looked impressive but lacked crucial implementation details, talked about my progress in vague terms that sounded substantive but were actually quite hollow. "I'm making good progress on the authentication layer," I'd say. planning to implement OAuth 2.0 with some custom extensions for our specific use case. It sounded specific enough to satisfy him, but it didn't actually give him the information he'd need to present the work as his own. The real details, the actual technical decisions, the clever solutions to complex problems, the implementation strategies, those I kept in my private repository, documented meticulously, shared with no one. Let him take the bait again, I thought. Let him think he can ride this project to another promotion, just like he did with the automation system. Meanwhile, I was creating an evidence trail that would be impossible to deny. Every technical decision was documented in detailed design documents that I time-stamped and saved to my private drive. Every line of code was committed to my private repository, with messages that clearly explained what I was building and why. Every meeting where I discussed the project was followed up with a detailed email summary sent to the team list, with HR CC'd, of course. I was building two things simultaneously: a genuinely innovative API redesign and an absolutely airtight case against Alex. The brilliance of the trap was its simplicity. Alex thought he was in control, thought he understood the pattern we'd established. I do the work, he presents it, I stay silent, he gets promoted. We'd done this dance before, and from his perspective, it had worked perfectly. So he didn't see the trap closing around him. He started having those familiar conversations with leadership, started dropping hints about the groundbreaking API work I'm leading, started positioning himself as the visionary behind another major technical innovation. And I let him. I smiled and nodded when he asked for updates. I sent him high-level summaries that maintained the illusion that he understood the work. I played my role perfectly. But there was one crucial detail he'd missed, one element I'd embedded in my work that would ultimately destroy him. Every file I created for the API redesign had detailed metadata linking it directly to my account. Not just the obvious stuff like author fields and timestamps, but hidden forensic markers that would prove authorship beyond any doubt. Digital watermarks embedded in the code itself, unique patterns in my documentation, linguistic fingerprints in my technical writing. I'd learned this technique from a brief stint doing academic research in college, where plagiarism detection was serious business. The same principles applied here. Create markers that prove authorship even if someone copies your work word for word. Alex had no idea. He thought he was being careful by rewriting some of my explanations and reformatting some of my diagrams. He thought those superficial changes were enough to obscure the theft. He was wrong. I also did something else, something so subtle that Alex never noticed. In my weekly emails with project updates, I started including small technical errors. Nothing major, nothing that would cause real problems, just minor mistakes in my descriptions that any expert would immediately recognize and correct. An incorrect term here, a slightly wrong explanation there. Small breadcrumbs that would prove whether someone actually understood the work or was just copying my reports. In our next leadership presentation, Alex repeated one of those errors verbatim. He described the API's caching strategy using the wrong technical term, lazy loading, when the correct term was eager evaluation. It was a small mistake, but one that demonstrated he didn't actually understand what he was presenting. He was reading from a script I'd intentionally written incorrectly. I watched one of the senior architects frown slightly when Alex said it, watched her glance at her notes, then at Alex, then back at her notes. The seed of doubt was planted. I sent a follow-up email after that meeting clarifying some of the technical details. Just to ensure accuracy for the record, I wrote, I wanted to correct a small point from today's presentation. The caching implementation uses eager evaluation, not lazy loading. Here's the detailed technical specification I wrote explaining the approach. And I attached a document that was dated 2 weeks before Alex's presentation. A document that used the correct terminology and demonstrated clear understanding of the technical concepts. The correction looked helpful, professional, collaborative. But what it actually did was create evidence that I understood the work and Alex didn't. That I was the source of accurate information and he was copying, sometimes incorrectly, from my reports. It took HR less than a week to notice the pattern. I don't know who flagged it first. Maybe it was the senior architect who'd frowned at Alex's mistake. Maybe it was someone in HR who'd been reading my weekly updates and noticed inconsistencies between my detailed technical reports and Alex's vaguer leadership updates. Maybe it was Linda, the director of engineering, who'd started asking questions about project attribution after seeing too many presentations where team members looked uncomfortable when Alex took credit. But someone noticed, and once they started looking, the evidence was overwhelming. My weekly emails, all CC'd to HR's general inbox, created a contemporaneous record of my work. The version control history showed hundreds of commits in my name, with detailed messages explaining technical decisions. The design documents in my private drive, which I'd strategically mentioned in emails, creating a trail, had creation dates that predated any of Alex's presentations. And the metadata. Oh, the metadata. Every file was digitally signed with my account information, time-stamped by systems Alex couldn't manipulate, watermarked in ways he never thought to look for. When HR pulled all the evidence together, it told an undeniable story. Alex had been systematically taking credit for work he didn't do, presenting others' technical achievements as his own, and building his reputation on a foundation of lies and stolen accomplishments. The investigation was quiet. Corporate investigations usually are. No dramatic confrontation, no public accusations, just careful examination of evidence by people trained to separate truth from spin. I didn't know it was happening at first. Everything seemed normal. Meetings continued, projects progressed. Alex still strutted around like he owned the place. But then I noticed small changes. Alex being pulled into unexpected meetings with HR. Linda asking me detailed questions about project timelines and one-on-ones. Questions that seemed oddly specific and legally careful. The CTO sending me a calendar invite for a technical deep dive, where she asked me to explain the API redesign in detail from first principles, with a level of scrutiny that went beyond mere curiosity. They were verifying, making absolutely certain before they acted. It took them less than a week to complete the investigation once they started. The evidence was that clear, that overwhelming, that undeniable. The day Alex's world ended started like any other Tuesday. I came into the office, grabbed my usual coffee from the third-floor break room, sat down at my desk to check emails and plan my day. It was almost absurdly normal. The sun was shining through the office windows. Someone had brought donuts for the team, the ambient noise of a working office creating that familiar buzz of productivity. I had no idea that several floors above me, in a conference room with frosted glass walls and uncomfortable chairs, Alex was being confronted with 6 months of evidence. The first sign something was wrong came around 10:30 a.m. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. Alex just got called into an unexpected meeting with HR and Linda, looked serious. My heart started pounding. This was it. The trap was springing closed. I forced myself to keep working, to maintain my normal routine, to give no indication that I knew anything unusual was happening. I reviewed some code, responded to a few emails, helped a junior developer debug a particularly nasty issue with asynchronous callbacks. But my mind was elsewhere, imagining what was happening in that conference room. I'd later learn exactly what transpired, because HR's investigation report became part of my file. A document I requested and received as part of my own protection against any potential retaliation. Alex had walked into that conference room expecting what? Maybe a discussion about the API project timeline, maybe questions about resource allocation. He certainly wasn't expecting to find Linda, our director of engineering, Patricia from HR, and Thomas, the VP of engineering, all sitting with grim expressions and a thick folder of printed evidence. "Thank you for meeting with us on short notice, Alex," Patricia had started, her voice professionally neutral, in that way HR people master. "We need to discuss some concerns that have come to our attention regarding project attribution and proper crediting of work." Alex, according to the report, had maintained his composure. "Of course. Is there a problem?" "We've been reviewing project documentation and contribution records," Linda said, opening the folder. "Specifically related to the automation project completed last quarter and the ongoing API redesign. We have some questions about the presentations you've given regarding these projects." "I'm happy to clarify anything," Alex said smoothly, still confident, still thinking he could talk his way out of whatever minor issue they'd identified. "As the team manager, I've been coordinating these efforts and presenting our collective work to leadership. That's standard managerial responsibility." "I understand that," Patricia said. "However, we've found significant discrepancies between your presentations and the actual authorship of the work. Let me show you something." She'd pulled out the first piece of evidence, a side-by-side comparison of my weekly update from March 15th and Alex's presentation to leadership from March 22nd. The same architecture diagrams, the same technical explanations, the same performance metrics, but only one was credited to me. This weekly update was sent by Jordan to the team distribution list, which includes HR's general inbox. It's dated March 15th. Your presentation to the leadership team on March 22nd contains the same content, but you presented it as your own work. Can you explain that? I imagine Alex's confidence had started to crack then, but he'd tried to maintain the spin. "Jordan is part of my team. When I present team accomplishments, I'm representing collective work. I mentioned the team's contributions." "Actually," Thomas interjected, "we reviewed the recording of that presentation. You said, and I quote, 'I've been working on a comprehensive solution, and the overall vision and architecture were mine.' Those statements suggest individual authorship, not team collaboration. That's a misunderstanding of how I meant." "Let's look at more evidence," Patricia interrupted, pulling out the next document, and the next, and the next. The version control logs showing hundreds of commits in my name. The design documents with my authorship metadata. The email trails establishing clear timelines. The technical corrections I'd sent, proving I understood the work, while Alex's presentations contained errors suggesting he was copying without comprehension. With each piece of evidence, Alex's explanations had become weaker, more defensive, more desperate. "This looks bad, but it's really just a communication issue. I may have been unclear in some of my presentations, but my intent was never to. Jordan has never complained about this before, so I assumed. The assumption that my silence meant consent. The assumption that he could rewrite history because no one would challenge him. The assumption that his position as manager gave him the right to claim credit for others' work. All those assumptions were being systematically destroyed by evidence he'd never realized was being collected. The meeting had lasted over 2 hours. By the end, according to the report, Alex had stopped trying to justify and started trying to minimize, claiming it was just a misunderstanding about expectations, suggesting that this is how things work in corporate environments, arguing that good managers present their team's work as their own to senior leadership. But Patricia had shut that down immediately. "Alex, what you're describing is not standard management practice. Standard practice is saying, 'My team accomplished this,' or 'Jordan led this initiative.' What you did was present other people's work as your own individual accomplishments. That's not management. That's misrepresentation." The final blow came when Thomas pulled out the API redesign documentation, the project that was still in progress, the trap I'd so carefully set. "We asked Jordan to walk us through the technical details of the API redesign yesterday," Thomas said. She provided comprehensive explanations demonstrating deep understanding of every architectural decision, every implementation detail, every trade-off considered. Then we reviewed your presentation to the steering committee last week. You used her exact language, her diagrams, her examples. But when we asked you some basic technical questions about the implementation, you couldn't answer them. That's when Alex had apparently realized how thoroughly he'd been caught. The trap wasn't just about past theft. It was about demonstrating a pattern that was ongoing, systematic, and undeniable. We're going to need to place you on administrative leave while we complete this investigation, Patricia said. Please collect your personal belongings. You'll need to turn in your badge and laptop to security. Someone from IT will escort you. Wait, Alex said, and the report noted that his voice had changed then. Less smooth manager, more desperate man. Can we talk about this? I've delivered results for this company. The project succeeded. Does it really matter who gets credit as long as the work gets done? The answer, of course, was yes. It mattered enormously. But Alex didn't hear that answer then. He was escorted out of the conference room, down to his office to collect his things, and then out of the building entirely. The entire walk of shame witnessed by enough people, that word spread through the office like wildfire. I was in a code review with Sarah when the whispers started. Did you hear? Alex just got walked out by security. I saw him leaving with a box of his stuff. Looked furious. HR investigation, apparently. Something about taking credit for other people's work. Sarah looked at me with wide eyes. I kept my expression carefully neutral, but I couldn't stop the small smile that tugged at my lips. Jordan, she whispered, did you... I documented everything, I said quietly. That's all. I just made sure the truth was available when someone finally looked for it. An hour later, I got called into Linda's office. My heart was racing as I walked down the hall, even though I knew I'd done nothing wrong. Corporate investigations are stressful, even when you're not the target. Linda gestured for me to sit, her expression serious, but not unkind. Jordan, thank you for coming. I want to talk to you about what's been happening with Alex. Okay, I said carefully. We've completed a preliminary investigation into concerns about project attribution and discovered a systematic pattern of Alex misrepresenting team member contributions as his own accomplishments. Your work, specifically, appears to have been significantly misattributed. I nodded but didn't speak. Let her lead this conversation. I need to apologize, Linda continued, and that surprised me. As Alex's manager, I should have caught this sooner. I should have been more diligent about verifying claims and ensuring proper attribution. The fact that this continued for months represents a failure of oversight on my part. I appreciate that, I said. I also want to thank you for the documentation you've been maintaining, your weekly updates, your detailed technical reports, your careful record keeping. That made it possible to establish the truth clearly and quickly. Without that evidence trail, this would have been a much murkier, he said, she said situation. I just wanted to make sure my contributions were recorded, I said, which was technically true if dramatically understated. Well, your contributions are now very clearly recorded and recognized. We'll be making some organizational changes in the wake of this situation, and I'd like to discuss your role in those changes. But first, I need to ask, did Alex ever explicitly threaten you or engage in other forms of workplace misconduct beyond the credit misappropriation? I thought about it carefully. No explicit threats, but there was an implicit pressure to stay silent. A sense that speaking up would mark me as not a team player or difficult to work with. The kind of thing that's hard to prove, but easy to feel. Linda nodded grimly. That's a cultural issue we need to address. No one should feel they can't report concerns about proper attribution without fear of retaliation. We talked for another 30 minutes about the investigation, about what would happen next, about resources available to me if I needed support. It was all very professional, very HR appropriate, very carefully documented. As I was leaving, Linda said one more thing. Jordan, off the record, I'm impressed by how you handled this. You stayed professional, documented everything thoroughly, and let the evidence speak for itself. That takes significant maturity and strategic thinking. I smiled. Sometimes silence is louder than accusations. Indeed it is. I walked back to my desk, feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight of Alex's theft, the constant anger simmering under forced professionalism, the stress of maintaining my documentation while pretending everything was normal, all of it lifted. But Alex wasn't done yet, not quite. He called me that afternoon. I was surprised my number wasn't blocked by IT, but apparently the administrative leave hadn't included a complete communication lockdown yet. I almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Jordan! His voice was tight with barely controlled rage. We need to talk. I don't think that's appropriate while you're under investigation, Alex. You know what's not appropriate, stabbing your manager in the back. Going behind my back to HR, sabotaging my career. I felt my own anger rising, but kept my voice level. I didn't sabotage your career, Alex. I documented my work, that's all. If that documentation revealed problems with how you were representing contributions, that's not my fault. You set me up, he hissed. That API project, those weekly emails, all of it was a trap. It was documentation, I corrected. The fact that it proved you were taking credit for work you didn't do, that's on you, not me. You don't know who you're messing with, he said, and there was a threat in his voice that made my skin crawl. I have connections at this company, friends in high places. You think this is over, but it's not. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Are you threatening me? I asked. And I was already opening my recording app to capture the rest of this call. Too late for the beginning, but better than nothing. I'm just telling you how things work, Alex said. You're going to regret this. Alex, I'm going to hang up now. If you contact me again while the investigation is ongoing, I'll report it to HR as witness intimidation. Have a good day. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking slightly. Then I immediately forwarded a summary of the call to Patricia in HR, noting the time, the threatening tone, and Alex's statement about making me regret this. That call, it turned out, was the final nail in Alex's coffin. Threatening a witness during an active investigation crossed a line from misappropriation of credit to hostile workplace conduct. It transformed what might have been a resignation with a severance package into a termination for cause. 3 days later, the official email went out. It arrived at 9 a.m. on Friday morning, sent the entire engineering department. Subject: organizational update. Dear team, effective immediately, Alex Thompson is no longer with Vertex Solutions. We appreciate his contributions to the company and wish him well in his future endeavors. Linda Chen will be assuming direct management of the core engineering team until a permanent replacement is identified. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to Linda or HR. Best regards, Thomas Park, VP of Engineering. That was it. No details, no explanation, no drama. Just the corporate equivalent of being erased from existence. The office was silent when the email came through, not shocked, silent, not surprised silent, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when everyone knew something was wrong, when the whispers had been circulating for days, when the resolution feels both inevitable and anticlimactic. I was at my desk when it arrived. I read it twice, then closed my laptop and sat back in my chair, processing the finality of it. He was gone. The man who'd stolen 6 months of my best work, who'd built his reputation on lies and other people's accomplishments, who'd looked me in the eye and presented my automation system as his own masterpiece. He was gone. I didn't celebrate. Didn't high-five Sarah or pop champagne with Marcus or send gloating messages to anyone. I just sat there, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. Sarah rolled her chair over to my desk. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." "You did it," she said quietly. "You actually took him down." "I didn't take him down," I corrected. "He took himself down. I just made sure there was a clear record of what he did." "Same difference." "No," I said firmly. "It's an important distinction. I didn't sabotage him or set him up or do anything unethical. I just documented my work and let the truth speak for itself. That's all anyone needs to do when someone's stealing credit. Make the truth visible." Marcus joined us, keeping his voice low despite the fact that everyone in the office was probably having similar conversations. "I heard he called you, threatened you. Word travels fast." "Not really. Security mentioned it when they came to make sure he hadn't left any access credentials active. Said he'd made threatening phone calls to a witness, and that's what pushed it from resignation to termination." "Good," I said. "He needed to face real consequences." We sat there for a moment, the three of us, processing the end of something that had poisoned our work environment for months. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now," I said, "we get back to doing actual work, building things that matter, contributing to projects without worrying about who's going to steal credit, being part of a team that actually functions like a team." "Think they'll promote you?" Marcus asked. "You're basically doing manager-level work without the title." I shrugged. "Maybe, eventually. But honestly, I'm not in a rush. I just want to work somewhere where my contributions are recognized and I don't have to constantly defend my own accomplishments." "Setting the bar pretty low there," Sarah joked. "Maybe," I agreed, "but after the past 6 months, basic professional respect sounds pretty damn good." The rest of the day was surreal. People stopped by my desk with carefully vague comments. "Glad things are getting sorted out." "Looking forward to working more directly with you." "Hope the team culture improves now." Everyone knew what had happened, but no one wanted to say it explicitly. Corporate discretion at its finest. Linda scheduled a team meeting for Monday to discuss the transition and restructure. The weekend stretched ahead, the first weekend in months where I didn't have Alex's theft hanging over my head, where I could actually relax without the constant background stress of maintaining documentation and planning my next move. I went home Friday evening, ordered my favorite Thai food, and watched mindless television until I fell asleep on the couch. No work laptop open beside me, no notes about what to document next, no strategic planning about how to protect my contributions. Just rest. Finally. The Monday morning team meeting was nothing like the drama-filled confrontations I'd imagined during my worst moments of planning revenge against Alex. There was no public reading of his crimes, no detailed explanation of what he'd done, no vindication through explicit acknowledgement. It was just professional, corporate, appropriate. Linda addressed the team with the kind of careful messaging that HR had clearly reviewed. "As you know, we've had some organizational changes. I want to address how we're moving forward and ensure everyone feels heard and valued in this transition." She talked about revised processes for project attribution, about implementing more robust documentation standards, about regular check-ins to ensure contributors were being properly recognized, about creating a culture where people felt safe raising concerns about credit allocation. She didn't mention Alex by name, didn't need to. Everyone knew these changes were directly because of what he'd done, what the investigation had uncovered, what had ended his time at Vertex so abruptly. But there was one moment, one small acknowledgement, that meant more to me than any dramatic public declaration would have. "I also want to recognize some outstanding technical work that hasn't been properly acknowledged," Linda said, pulling up a slide. "Jordan, your automation project last quarter resulted in a 70% reduction in testing time and has become a critical part of our deployment infrastructure. Your ongoing API redesign work is setting new standards for our system architecture. These contributions represent exactly the kind of innovation and technical excellence we value, and I want to make sure they're properly attributed to you, not to anyone else. The applause that followed was genuine, not the confused, stolen applause from Alex's presentation months ago, but real recognition from colleagues who knew the truth. Sarah and Marcus were grinning. Even people who hadn't been directly affected by Alex's credit theft were nodding in approval. It wasn't about the applause, though. It was about the official record being corrected, about my name being associated with my work in the company's institutional memory, about future performance reviews and promotion discussions referencing my actual contributions instead of Alex's fabricated ones. That was the real victory. After the meeting, Linda pulled me aside for a private conversation in her office. "Jordan, I want to discuss your career trajectory here," she said, once we were seated. "Obviously, the situation with Alex has brought your technical capabilities and professional maturity into sharp focus. The leadership team has been discussing how to better utilize your skills and ensure you're positioned for growth." "I appreciate that," I said, carefully, not sure where this was going. "We're planning to restructure the core engineering team. We need someone to serve as a technical lead, not a people manager, but someone who can own architectural decisions, mentor junior engineers, and serve as a bridge between individual contributors and management. The role comes with a significant raise and would put you on a clear path towards senior leadership if that's something you're interested in." My heart was racing. This was more than I'd hoped for, faster than I'd expected. "That sounds like an exciting opportunity." "There's no pressure to decide immediately," Linda continued. "Take some time to think about whether it aligns with your career goals. But I want you to know that this isn't some kind of consolation prize or guilt offering because of what happened with Alex. You've earned this through your technical work, your professionalism, and your strategic thinking. The situation with Alex just made it more obvious that we were underutilizing you. Can I ask a question?" "Of course." "Why didn't anyone notice sooner?" The words came out before I could stop them. Alex was taking credit for months. I wasn't the only one he did it to. Why did it take so long for leadership to see the pattern? Linda sighed, and I saw real regret in her expression. "That's a fair question, and one I've been asking myself. Honestly, he was good at what he did. The theft, I mean. He was careful, just ambiguous enough to maintain plausible deniability. And he targeted people who were unlikely to make a fuss. He also delivered what looked like results to upper management, which made us less inclined to scrutinize how those results were actually achieved. So it was easier to believe him than to investigate. Not easier, more comfortable, and that's on me. As his manager, I should have been more diligent about verifying claims and checking in with team members about attribution. I should have noticed when your name disappeared from presentations about projects I knew you were working on. I should have questioned why Alex's accomplishments always seemed to spike right after you completed major work. "What changed?" I asked. "What made you finally look?" Honestly, the senior architect who frowned during Alex's API presentation. She came to me after that meeting and said something felt off, that Alex couldn't answer basic technical questions about work he was claiming to have architected. That prompted me to start asking questions, which led to reviewing documentation, which revealed the pattern. And once I started looking, it was overwhelmingly obvious. The evidence was right there. I just never bothered to look for it. I nodded, appreciating her honesty, even as it confirmed my cynicism about corporate oversight. "For what it's worth," Linda said, "the company is implementing new processes to prevent this from happening again. Mandatory contributor attribution in all presentations, regular one-on-ones specifically focused on ensuring people feel their work is being recognized. Training for managers about proper credit allocation. It won't fix the past, but hopefully it protects future team members." "That's good," I said, and I meant it. This wasn't just about my revenge anymore. It was about creating a system where credit theft was harder to execute and easier to catch. Think about the technical lead role, Linda said as I stood to leave. But Jordan, whatever you decide, thank you for your work, your professionalism, and your integrity throughout this situation. You handled something that could have become a toxic mess with remarkable grace. Grace. That wasn't a word I'd have used for my carefully plotted documentation strategy and my patient trap setting. But I suppose from the outside, it looked like grace. It looked like someone taking the high road, staying professional, letting the system work. They didn't need to know about the anger that had burned in my chest during those months of documentation. The nights I'd spent fantasizing about more dramatic revenge. The satisfaction I'd felt watching Alex's world collapse under the weight of his own lies. Sometimes grace and revenge look the same from the outside. The difference is in the motivation, and that's something only I needed to know. Over the following weeks, the office culture shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. People seemed more willing to speak up in meetings, to claim their ideas, to push back when someone tried to reframe their contributions. The fear of being labeled difficult or not a team player had lessened now that everyone had seen that credit theft had consequences. Sarah got properly recognized for her sprint velocity analysis that Alex had claimed as his leadership insight. Marcus got credit for the deployment automation improvements that had been attributed to the team under Alex's direction. Even junior developers started more confidently presenting their work, knowing it wouldn't be mysteriously absorbed into someone else's accomplishments. The automation project, my automation project, now officially and permanently mine in the company's records, became a case study used in engineering onboarding. New hires learned about it as Jordan's automation framework, saw my architectural decisions, read my documentation. My name was permanently attached to the work I'd done, immune to retroactive theft. I accepted the technical lead position. The raise was significant. The responsibility was exciting, and the recognition felt earned rather than given. My first project in the new role was completing the API redesign, which I presented to the leadership team myself, answering every technical question with the confidence of someone who'd actually built the system. The presentation went flawlessly. The questions were tough, but fair. And when Thomas, the VP of Engineering, said, "This is excellent work, Jordan. Exactly the kind of technical innovation we need," I felt a satisfaction that was entirely pure. No stolen valor, no misattributed success, just recognition for work I'd actually done. Emily from marketing approached me in the cafeteria a few weeks after everything settled. We'd worked together on a few cross-functional projects, but weren't particularly close. "Hey, Jordan, can I ask you something?" she said, sitting down across from me. "Sure." That situation with Alex, I heard rumors about what happened, about him taking credit for people's work. She paused, looking uncomfortable. "He did something similar to me on a campaign last year, presented my marketing strategy as his idea to the CMO. I thought about saying something, but I was afraid it would look petty or like I couldn't handle the politics of corporate life." "I understand that fear," I said. "But you said something, and they listened, and he's gone." She looked at me with something like hope. "Do you have any advice for people who are dealing with similar situations?" I thought about it for a moment. Document everything, every contribution, every email, every meeting. Create a contemporaneous record that's unambiguous about who did what. And then, if you need to escalate, you're not bringing emotions or accusations. You're bringing evidence. "Just document?" "Just document," I confirmed. "The truth is powerful when it's undeniable. You don't need drama or confrontation or revenge plots. You just need to make sure the truth is visible when someone finally looks for it. What if no one looks? Then you have documentation for your own performance reviews and resume. At minimum, you know your contributions are recorded accurately, even if leadership doesn't immediately recognize them. But more often than not, if you're documenting thoroughly, someone eventually notices the discrepancies." She nodded slowly. Thank you, really. Seeing what happened with Alex, it made me feel less crazy for being bothered by the credit theft. Like my instincts weren't wrong. Your instincts weren't wrong, I said firmly. And you're not crazy for expecting basic professional recognition. That's not asking too much. That's asking for the bare minimum of respect. Word of advice, conversations like that one spread. I became, somewhat accidentally, the unofficial resource for people dealing with attribution issues or credit theft. I didn't advertise this role, didn't set up office hours, or create a formal mentorship program. But people knew I'd successfully navigated the problem, and they quietly reached out for guidance. Each conversation reinforced the same lessons. Document thoroughly, stay professional, let evidence speak louder than emotion, and trust that truth has power when given time and visibility. 3 months after Alex's departure, I ran into him, not at the office, obviously, but at a coffee shop in the neighborhood where I still sometimes grabbed my morning caffeine before work. It was one of those beautiful autumn Saturdays, the kind where the air is crisp and the leaves are turning and the whole world feels like it's taking a breath before winter. I was waiting for my latte when I saw him sitting alone at a corner table. Alex, looking older somehow, though only months had passed. Thinner, like stress had burned away his corporate polish. He was staring at a laptop, but his eyes weren't really focused on the screen. For a moment, I considered leaving without being seen, avoiding the awkwardness, the potential confrontation, the dredging up of something that I'd worked hard to move past. But then I realized I didn't need to avoid him, didn't need to hide. This was my city, my coffee shop, my Saturday morning routine, and I had nothing to be ashamed of. I paid for my coffee, a fancy oat milk latte with an extra shot because I was celebrating completing a major project milestone and I deserved nice things. As I turned toward the door, Alex looked up. Our eyes met. I watched recognition flash across his face, followed by a complicated mixture of emotions I couldn't fully parse. Shame, maybe. Resentment. Definitely discomfort at being caught in a moment of diminishment by someone who'd contributed to his fall. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. Maybe apologize, though his apologies had proven hollow before. Maybe explain, though no explanation could justify what he'd done. Maybe just acknowledge the strangeness of this moment. 2 former colleagues whose lives had diverged so dramatically. But I didn't give him the chance. I just smiled. Not a cruel smile or a bitter one. Not a smile that said, I won, or you deserved this. Just a simple, genuine smile. The kind you give to someone you used to know, someone who used to matter, someone who doesn't anymore. I didn't say anything, didn't need to. My new clothes, bought with my technical lead salary, my confident posture, the lightness in my expression that came from working in an environment where my contributions were recognized and valued. It all said everything that needed saying. I'm okay. Better than okay. I'm thriving. And you're just someone I used to work with. I walked past his table, out into the bright October morning, leaving him there in the corner with his laptop and his diminished circumstances. I didn't look back, didn't need to. That chapter was closed, the book shelved, the story complete. As I walked home through streets painted with fall colors, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal that had enraged me, the fear that I'd be labeled difficult if I spoke up, the meticulous documentation that had felt like paranoia but proved to be vindication. And then the resolution, the investigation, the evidence, the truth finally acknowledged. Alex's departure, my promotion, the culture shift that made the office a better place for everyone. When people talk about revenge, they picture shouting matches and slammed doors. They imagine dramatic confrontations and public humiliations. They think of revenge as loud, messy, emotional. But sometimes revenge doesn't need fire. It doesn't need drama. It doesn't even need personal confrontation. Sometimes revenge is just you, a coffee, and a company-wide email confirming justice was served. I didn't celebrate when that email arrived, didn't brag about taking down my former manager, didn't post vague social media messages about karma or justice or people getting what they deserve. I just kept working, kept building things that mattered, kept contributing to projects with my name properly attached, kept growing in my career and my skills and my confidence. And every time I walked past Alex's old office, now occupied by a new manager who actually valued attribution and honesty, I reminded myself of the lesson I'd learned. Silence is louder than revenge when you're using it strategically. Truth does the talking if you give it time and documentation and a clear path to reach the people who need to hear it. And sometimes the best revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's simply making sure they can't benefit from your work anymore while you continue to thrive. A year after Alex's departure, I was invited to speak on a panel at a tech industry conference about navigating workplace challenges and advocating for proper attribution. The panel was titled, "Your Name Here, Ensuring Your Contributions Get Recognized." And I'd been asked to participate because word had somehow spread about the Vertex situation, as it was diplomatically called. I almost said no. The wounds still felt too fresh to examine publicly. The story still too personal to share with strangers in a convention center ballroom. But then I thought about Emily from marketing, who'd finally reported her own credit theft issue and gotten results. About the junior developers who'd started confidently presenting their work. About the cultural shift at Vertex that made the company better for everyone. So I said yes. The room was packed, maybe 200 people, mostly engineers and project managers, all carrying stories of unrecognized work and stolen credit. I could see it in their faces, the recognition of shared frustration. The moderator asked me to share my experience. I took a breath and told the story, careful to focus on the lessons rather than the drama. The hardest part wasn't the theft itself, I said. It was knowing what was happening and feeling powerless to stop it without damaging my own career. There's this fear in corporate environments that if you speak up about credit theft, you'll be labeled as difficult to work with or not a team player. That fear keeps people silent while their accomplishments are stolen. Heads nodded throughout the audience. Recognition of shared experience. But here's what I learned, I continued. Documentation is power. You don't need drama or confrontation. You just need a clear, contemporaneous record of your contributions. Detailed emails, version control history, design documents, anything that creates a timestamp and proves authorship. The truth is powerful when it's undeniable. What about retaliation? Someone asked from the audience. Weren't you afraid your manager would make your life miserable if you documented everything? I was terrified, I admitted. But the key is documentation that looks routine and professional, not accusatory. Weekly status updates, technical reports, project documentation, all standard professional behavior that happens to create evidence. You're not building a case against someone. You're just doing your job thoroughly. Another question. How long did it take before anyone noticed the pattern? Too long, I said, honestly. Months. And that's because people in leadership positions don't always look critically at successful managers. If someone's delivering results, there's not much incentive to investigate how those results are actually being achieved. Sometimes it takes an outside trigger. In my case, a senior architect noticing technical inconsistencies in a presentation. So we just have to wait and hope someone notices? Not hope. Engineer the situation where someone will notice. I explained the strategic errors I'd embedded, the escalating documentation, the way I'd made the truth impossible to ignore once anyone started looking. Create conditions where the truth becomes visible, then trust that eventually someone will see it. After the panel, people lined up to talk to me. Engineers sharing their own stories of stolen credit, managers asking how to prevent this on their teams. junior developers seeking advice on protecting their work. One woman, probably in her 50s, with the tired eyes of someone who'd fought these battles for decades, waited until everyone else had left. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've been in this industry for 30 years. I've had my work stolen more times than I can count. And every time I stayed silent because I thought that was the professional thing to do. Listening to you today, I realized silence isn't professionalism. It's just fear dressed up in corporate language." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "Start documenting," she said, with a small smile. "I'm not going to let the next 20 years look like the last 30. I hugged this stranger who felt like a sister in survival. "You deserve recognition for your work. It's not asking too much." Walking out of that conference, I thought about Alex one last time, wondered if he ever thought about what he'd lost, what his greed and dishonesty had cost him. Wondered if he'd learned anything, or if he was running the same patterns somewhere else, with new victims. But mostly, I realized I didn't care. His story wasn't mine anymore. Whatever happened to him, whatever job he found or failed to find, whatever growth he achieved or failed to achieve, it had nothing to do with me. My story was about resilience and strategic thinking and the power of documentation. About learning that I didn't need to be loud or dramatic to be effective. About discovering that sometimes the most powerful weapon is simply making the truth undeniable. My story was about karma, yes, but not the mystical kind, the systematic kind, the kind where actions have consequences, and lies eventually collapse under their own weight, and truth finds its way to the surface when given proper documentation and time. He stole credit. The truth did the talking, and I walked away from the wreckage and built something better. Not just for me, but for everyone who came after. For the junior developers who'd never have to fear their first big project being stolen. For the colleagues who now worked in an environment where attribution mattered. For the people at that conference who left with a plan instead of just frustration. Sometimes revenge doesn't need fire. It just needs patience, documentation, and the willingness to let truth take its time. And sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's simply refusing to be erased.